Okay, so this is rewrite equations and formulas. So we have a new definition. It's literal equation, and basically this is an equation whose coefficients and constants have been replaced by variables. Okay, and we've seen these before. Usually I call them general form of an equation, but my example here kind of cleared it up. So we're used to something like this: 2x plus 3y equals 4. A literal equation would literally replace the coefficients, which would be the numbers in front of our variables, right? 2 and 3. We replace those with variables. They can be any letters, A and B. And then this is a constant. It has no variable next to it, so that's a constant. And again, that's been replaced with the variable as well. So usually I call them the general form when they're important. But when it's just a basic equation that doesn't really mean anything, it's not special, they call it a literal equation. Okay? So let's take a look at example 1. It says solve the literal equation for x, then solve the specific equation. So first step is we're going to solve this first equation by x, which means we need to isolate x, right? So again, when I look at this equation, we should be pretty good at manipulating equations by now. What I want to do is I want to move the a away first. So I'm going to subtract a from both sides. And since these are all different variables, we cannot add or subtract because they are not like terms, right? So if I can't subtract a from c, so it's going to be c minus a, okay? And again, I'm trying to solve for x. So I need to think of what's happening here with x. Well, x is being multiplied by negative b, so I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to divide by negative b. And if I divide one side, I have to divide the other. I have to remember to divide everything by that negative b. So again, that becomes a 1. We get x equals c minus a over negative b. I don't really want to leave that negative there in the bottom. It gets kind of confusing. So what I'm going to do is whenever we divide by negative, basically what it means is just change the sign of everything that was already there. So I'm going to rewrite this as x equals negative c plus a over b. And that hopefully will make it a little bit easier. Okay? So I solved for x. I did my first part. But then it says solve the specific equation. So here's my equation. And basically what they want us to do is they want us to find what x equals. And it seems kind of backwards, but this is the start of algebra. You're going to learn that we learn something real fast. We learn it one way, and then you're going to have to learn it backwards. So this is the start of that. So we have to think back to what it said. Well, if we look at our general form, or our literal equation, a is the first number, which means my 12 is a, my negative 5 is b, which actually it's not negative 5, it's positive 5 because that minus is outside, right? There's a negative there, there's a negative. And then c, well c is negative 3. So I'm going to take this equation and I'm going to plug in those values. I'm going to substitute in those values. So x equals negative c. Well, that's negative 3, right? If I imagine this as being c. And then I add 12. And then I'm going to divide that by not negative 5, but positive 5. Okay, so now let's just do the math. Negative times a negative is a positive, so really I have 3 plus 12. Well, that's 15. 15 divided by 5, well, that is 3. So x equals 3. I know that, like I said, that's going to seem kind of weird. You're doing things backwards. But when you do algebra, it's pretty much what you do. You learn something forward, and then you learn it again backwards. Okay, so example number 2, now we're going to be rewriting equations. Okay, so now I have an equation. It has 2 variables, but that's okay because they want us to solve it so that y is a function of x. So this is some new wording, but basically what that is saying is that we want to solve for y. Okay. And we'll talk about functions more later. But we want to solve this equation for y. So if I look at this equation, again, I'm trying to get this one by itself. So I'm going to start on the same side and move everything else that way. So I'm going to subtract this whole term, negative 14x, and 10 and negative 14x are not like terms, so again, I'm just going to put them next to each other. Negative 2y comes down. I want to get y by itself, so I divide by negative 2. Okay. This becomes 1, and here we get a binomial over one number. And again, when we do this, that means divide both of them by this number. Don't just divide one and think you're done. Don't ever want to do that, okay? So let's think about this. 10 divided by negative 2, well, that's negative 5. Negative 14 divided by negative 2, well, that's a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so we're going to add 7x, okay? So we just solved for y, and we are done. We solved for y. Example number 3 says solve the formula. So here's the formula, P equals 2w plus 2l. This is the formula for the perimeter of a rectangle. And we want to solve it for w. Okay, so now we have a formula, same exact process as up here, but this is an actual formula, it's not just an equation. Okay, so let's solve it for w. We're going to subtract 2l from both sides. Again, these are not like terms, so I cannot do anything there. I'm just going to put them next to each other. P minus 2l, and that equals 2w. Divide by 2, and I'll get w by itself. And again, we have a big mess over here. I'm okay with you leaving it like that, because when you come across this in your problems, as soon as you get here, all it's going to ask you to do is plug in some values for P and L and then solve for W, which is not that big of a deal. Again, equation might be a little bit different, but once you solve for the variable, it's going to ask you to plug in values for the other variables and come up with a number. Okay, so hopefully we should be able to do our homework from this. This has been Rewrite Equations and Formulas.